Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into BL relationships. Well, not exactly the lovey-dovey kind. We're going deep into the dark side, the relationships that have viewers screaming toxic. We've got a ton of comments from you guys about some popular BL series, and let me tell you, some of these dynamics are seriously messed up. Obsessive behavior and control issues. You guys called out a bunch of shows where characters have these tendencies, and sometimes it gets pretty disturbing.
Definitely. And one that stands out is My Personal Weatherman. You describe Mookie as obsessed with Yo to the point of, like, controlling and selfish.
Yeah, and what's really unsettling is that Mookie's behavior is portrayed as romantic. Even though it's so obviously crossing boundaries, it makes you wonder why this is so appealing to some viewers.
I think it might tap into this fantasy of, like, all-consuming, passionate love,
Mm-hmm.
even if it means sacrificing someone's freedom. There's an intensity to it, right? A sense that the love is so powerful it can't be contained.
It's almost like a romanticized version of obsession.
Exactly. And it's crucial to separate what we see on screen from what's healthy in real life.
Yeah,
In reality, that level of obsession can be incredibly damaging, even dangerous.
for sure. And speaking of dangerous, you mentioned Love Syndrome 3, which sounds really disturbing. You said the main character, Day, has an obsession disorder and uses physical violence as his love language.
Yeah. And what's striking about this series is Day's family. They see how toxic the relationship is. They try to step in. But Day refuses to leave. It shows just how strong those obsessive feelings can be and how tough it is to break free from an unhealthy dynamic, even with support.
It's like a reminder that love doesn't always equal healthy. Sometimes the most passionate relationships are the ones that need the most scrutiny. Speaking of passion, another theme you brought up was one-sided love and emotional torture. A lot of these shows have characters who are head over heels in love, but their feelings aren't reciprocated.
Right. And that can be just as damaging as physical violence, even if it's not as obvious. When someone keeps pouring their heart into a relationship that isn't being nurtured by the other person, it can lead to some deep emotional wounds and feelings of worthlessness.
You brought up I Promised You the Moon as an example. One character, Oya, puts love above all else, while T is more focused on his career.
Yeah. And it's not that it's wrong to prioritize a career, but the issue is the lack of communication and empathy. Tay's not trying to be mean. He's just not in the same place emotionally as Oya, and that creates a lot of hurt and resentment.
It really highlights the need to be on the same page with your partner about goals and expectations for the relationship. Misaligned priorities can lead to heartbreak, even if both people mean well.
Absolutely. Relationships are a two-way street. Both partners need to put in the effort, nurture the connection, meet each other's needs. When it's just one person constantly giving, it creates an imbalance that can eventually destroy the relationship.
And speaking of imbalances, you mentioned Only Friends, which explores this theme a little differently. You said it shows toxic friendships and romantic relationships, especially with Sand and Ray. What's so toxic about their relationship?
Well, Ray acts like he's entitled to Sand's life. He expects Sand to always be there for him emotionally, but he doesn't give back that same level of support or validation.
You also said that Ray sees Sand as a backup plan if his relationship with his best friend doesn't work out. That's so messed up.
Totally. It's like he's using Sand for emotional support without really caring about his feelings. Sand becomes a safety net, someone Ray can rely on without having to fully commit or invest in their relationship.
It's a reminder that toxicity isn't always about obvious abuse or aggression. It can be about manipulation and emotional neglect, too.
Exactly. And in some ways, those subtle forms of toxicity can be even worse because they're harder to see and deal with. It's much easier to spot a blatant act of aggression than to figure out the real reasons behind someone's words and actions.
Okay, speaking of figuring out motivations, let's talk about Tharn type. This series shows the making a straight man gay trope, which you said adds to the toxicity. Can you explain that a bit more?
This trope is problematic for a few reasons. First, it reinforces the idea that straight men can be turned gay, which isn't true, and invalidates real LGBTQ plus experiences. It pushes the idea that sexual orientation is a choice.
And in Tharn type specifically, how does this play out in a toxic way?
Well, at first, Type is really homophobic and resists Tharn's advances. And even though he eventually comes to terms with his feelings, the whole process is full of conflict and emotional turmoil.
You mentioned that Tharn tries to be patient, but Type can be violent.
Yeah, and it makes you question the consent and coercion. Is Type truly choosing to be with Tharn, or is he giving in to pressure and internalized homophobia? The series blurs the lines, making it hard to tell if their relationship is based on real love or forced conversion.
It seems like this trope often romanticizes overcoming prejudice, but in reality, it just spreads harmful stereotypes and sets up unrealistic expectations about LGBTQ plus relationships.
For sure. It's crucial to see genuine representations of LGBTQ plus characters and relationships, ones that don't rely on outdated tropes or harmful narratives.
Okay, before we move on, you called out Kin Portia as being super toxic. What's the deal with that one?
This series has a relationship between Vegas, who's part of a powerful mafia family, and Pete, his bodyguard. It might seem like a typical enemies to lovers story, but the dynamic between them is really complex and disturbing.
You said there's no couple more toxic than Vegas and Pete. What makes their relationship so compelling, even though it's toxic?
I think it's the mix of power dynamics, forbidden love, and that intense chemistry. Vegas is a master manipulator. He uses his authority and charm to pull Pete in. And Pete, even though he resists at first, is drawn to Vegas's intensity and the thrill of the forbidden.
Sounds like a classic case of being seduced by the dark side. But that doesn't make it okay.
Exactly. And while the series doesn't shy away from showing the darker parts of their relationship, it also makes their connection seem intriguing and exciting. It's a dangerous mix that leaves viewers both fascinated and disturbed.
Well, on that note, I think we need a moment to process all this intensity. We've covered a lot, but there's still more to unpack.
Yeah, a lot to unpack, for sure.
No kidding. Okay, so let's maybe shift gears for a second, talk about something that might seem a bit less intense, but it's still super important. Prioritizing careers over relationships. You mentioned this came up in some shows. And honestly, I think it's something a lot of people relate to, whether they're watching BL or dealing with it in real life.
It's a common struggle, for sure. Especially now, with everyone so focused on their careers. Sometimes ambitions clash with, personal stuff, and pasted text really highlights that tension. You mentioned, I promised you the moon. Right. Specifically, Oya and Tae.
Exactly. You pointed out that Oya puts love first, while Tae seems more into his career. What are your thoughts on that kind of dynamic?
Well, it's not unusual for people to be in different places in their lives. Some people are more focused on relationships, others on their careers. In this case, Tae's driven, ambitious. While Oya wants to build a strong connection, an emotional one, the problem isn't their priorities themselves, it's that they don't communicate and understand each other.
It's like classic mismatched expectations. They both seem like good guys, but they want different things. And they just can't seem to bridge that gap. So much heartache. It's extra frustrating because they clearly care about each other, but it's like they just can't make it work.
And that's how a lot of relationships end. It's not always about a lack of love. Sometimes it's just not the right fit. Their life goals and priorities clash.
It makes you think that maybe a break, even though it'd be painful, could be good for them. Like they need to figure out what they really want.
That's an interesting thought. Sometimes taking a step back, even temporarily, can give you the space you need to grow, reassess your needs, and who knows, maybe down the line they can come back together, stronger, more on the same page.
If you love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it's yours. If not, it was never meant to be.
Exactly. Letting go can be the best thing for both people to grow and, evolve, both individually and as a couple.
It's funny how so many of these shows, even the ones with all the toxic relationships, often have this hopeful vibe. Like, no matter how messy things get, there's always this possibility of redemption or growth.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of why they're so engaging to watch. We know the patterns are unhealthy, but we're still rooting for the characters, hoping they'll find happiness and work things out.
Right.
It taps into our own desire for hope.
Yeah.
Like even when things are tough, there's a chance for resolution.
Absolutely. Okay, speaking of hope for redemption, there's Big Dragon. This one sounds wild. You mentioned that the couple in this show really do each other dirty before they even start dating.
Oh, yeah. At first, they're full of misunderstandings. They can't communicate. They even do some pretty questionable stuff. Their relationship starts off super rocky.
But they eventually build this deep connection, so it's like they have to go through all that pain and drama to finally reach a good place.
Exactly. And I think it shows how complex relationships can be. We all make mistakes, we hurt each other, but sometimes we can grow and learn from those experiences. Of course, we have to remember that early patterns can leave scars. It takes work and commitment to rebuild trust after a rough start.
You can't start a new chapter if you keep rereading the last one. Sometimes you have to let go and move on to something better.
Perfectly said. And I think Big Dragon does a great job of showing that journey, that path toward growth, and forgiveness,
Yeah.
even though it's not always easy.
Speaking of journeys, there's My Beautiful Man. This one deals with obsession in a really interesting way.
You said Hira has an obsession disorder, which leads to some unhealthy behavior toward his partner Kai. What struck you about their dynamic?
It's how they show the complexities of love and mental health. Hurrah is clearly in love with Kai, but his obsession makes it hard for him to show it in a healthy way. And Kai, even though he's on the receiving end of that unhealthy behavior, seems to understand Hurrah's struggles and still cares deeply.
It's tough to get that balance right. But I think the show manages to show both the tender and the troubling parts of their relationship. It raises some questions about the limits of love, how to deal with mental health in a relationship, and the importance of getting help when you need it.
It makes you think about how love can make you ignore red flags or put up with behavior you shouldn't. It shows how important it is to set boundaries and see when someone's actions, even if they're coming from love, are crossing the line.
Absolutely. We also have to remember, we can't fix other people. Everyone's responsible for their own mental and emotional health. We can offer support, but real change has to come from within.
So true. Okay, let's switch gears again and talk about the classic love triangle trope. You mentioned Love Mechanics shows how playing games can backfire and how important self-respect is.
Right. Mark keeps falling for people who are already taken. And then there's V, who plays mind games to keep Mark around, even though he has a girlfriend.
It's a recipe for disaster. It makes you question Mark's self-esteem. Why does he keep putting himself in these situations?
It could be a lack of self-worth. Maybe he's scared of being alone. Or maybe he subconsciously wants the drama. Whatever the reason, he's clearly not putting his own emotional well-being first.
And then there's V, who's lying to both Mark and Dee, his girlfriend. He wants to have it all, but someone's gonna get hurt.
For sure. Honesty and open communication are so important for a healthy relationship. When those are missing, it's just a matter of time before things fall apart.
It's a good reminder that you can't build something real on lies and manipulation. The truth will always come out, and the fallout can be brutal.
Speaking of fallout, let's talk about another show that shows manipulation and power dynamics. Unforgettable Night. You said it's a mafia series, so obviously power and control are already huge themes.
And you pointed out the relationship between Kim and Kamal, where Kamal uses his power to control Kim. What's interesting about that dynamic?
It's how this show blurs the lines between passion and obsession. Kamal's attracted to Kim, but it comes out as possessiveness and control. He uses his influence to restrict Kim's freedom and turn him into what he wants.
It's a perfect example of how power imbalances can create a toxic relationship, even when there are real feelings there.
Exactly. Love isn't about dominance or control. It's about respect, trust, and letting each person be themselves.
And it makes you think that these kinds of stories, even with the problems they show, can actually help raise awareness. By seeing it on screen, we might recognize it in real life and understand how damaging it can be.
Totally. It's like holding up a mirror, right? Hey, this is happening. Let's deal with it.
Exactly. But there's always that risk, isn't there, that maybe these shows normalize those unhealthy behaviors or even romanticize them, especially if they're not done carefully.
Yeah, that's true. It's a balancing act, and I think some shows handle it better than others. In the end, it's up to the viewer to be smart about it.
For sure. Just because something's entertaining doesn't mean it's healthy or something you should copy in your own life. We've got to think critically about what we're watching.
Absolutely. So if you could give viewers who love these stories one piece of advice, what would it be?
That's a good question.
I'd say enjoy the drama, the excitement. But don't forget, it's fiction, not reality. Don't let these shows mess with your judgment or lower your standards for what you deserve.
That's so important. And you mentioned a few other shows people should check out, both for how they show toxic relationships, A&D for the lessons they teach.
Oh, yeah. The Effect and Uncontrolled Love go deep into some serious relationship issues. They don't hold back on showing the damage that happens when you cross boundaries and stop communicating.
And then there's My Engineer, which has a more hopeful outlook. It shows that even a couple with a toxic beginning can work things out, build a healthier dynamic.
It reminds us that change is possible.
Yeah.
But it takes effort, commitment, and being willing to learn from your mistakes.
Absolutely. So after this deep dive into all the craziness of toxic BL relationships, what are your final thoughts? What do you hope listeners take away?
I hope they understand these dynamics better, on screen and in their own lives. I hope they can spot the red flags, set healthy boundaries, and put their own well-being first. You deserve respect, kindness. You deserve a relationship that brings you joy, not pain.
That's a great way to put it. So we'll leave you guys